Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. Joining me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, the superheroines, and the supervillains of Gotham City, and now somewhere in Transylvania, I suppose. She's Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Or should I call you? Should I call you Dr. Drea Harker? Are you? Although your dress is a little more actual Bram Stoker's Dracula.
It is. This is a dress that is inspired by the 1992 film, of course, Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is probably the very first Dracula film. Honestly, the very first Dracula film I ever saw.
Oh, really?
I think so. And so, this is a treat for folks who are watching on YouTube. I also have the limited edition accompanying bag.
And it does look much bigger here because of how you're holding it. It is a small purse.
Okay, how's that?
But it is maybe the coolest purse I've ever seen. It is a replica of Dracula's helmet from his warrior phase in Bram Stoker's Dracula. And it's probably the coolest thing I've ever seen. Made of hard plastic. Pretty heavy, actually.
It is. It's a little inconvenient, but when you're into monsters, there's so much.
When you're in the monster community,
so much inconvenience.
Yeah, understood. Well, it's a good thing that that you just coincidentally happen to be dressed like that. For those of you who have looked at the description of this particular episode, you will know that we are branching away from Disney's gargoyles, but somehow or another, I feel ever so slightly, because gargoyles are a prominent part of this movie that we're about to talk about. It is 2025's Dracula, made by Luc Besson. It's being released in the United States this week. This week, February 6th, 2026. Last night, you and I had an opportunity to see it via a special screening held by Collider. It included a Q&A with stars Christoph Waltz and Caleb Landry Jones. Christoph Waltz plays what I would assume would be kind of the Van Helsing character, though I don't think they ever actually call him Van Helsing. And then Caleb Landry Jones is doing the work of Count Dracula. You said that the first movie that you ever saw that was a Dracula, I'm guessing by that you don't mean like, Monster Squad or a movie with, an Abbott and Costello meets Dracula situation. You're not talking about movies with Dracula as a character. You're simply talking about
But honestly,
Dracula.
I didn't see Monster Squad until maybe like 10 years ago.
Yep.
So I'd say, the 1992 Dracula film, I would say definitely was the first Dracula film I ever saw, including any other references, cinematic references, cameos, like any other presentation of Dracula. That would have been the first one. And I did read the book, the novel that was re-released with all of the images from the film.
Oh, okay.
Because I was very obsessed. So I have read it.
Curious about those images because of the changes made to the story. Like, did they incorporate images that would not have applied to anything you were reading in that book?
Probably.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't want to disappoint my fellow Monster Mashers, but I may have a little bit of confusion rolling around in my head about the differences between Nosferatu and Dracula.
Oh.
Now, I will say that, again, I've seen now maybe 3 films about Dracula, because I've seen the 92, I've seen the original black and white Dracula much later, and then we saw Dracula, A Love Tale. Is that what it's officially called? Which is the 2026.
You've also seen the BBC miniseries.
Oh, yes, and I loved it. So the miniseries is another version. Also, as I understand it, based on Bram Stoker's Dracula. So where I have a little confusion is, as I understand it, Dracula can be a generic term people use to refer to a vampire. But Dracula, from a literary sense...
Who's generically doing that?
People like me.
Oh, okay.
But Dracula from a... like, oh, that person's dressed like Dracula for Halloween, or,
Sure.
oh, you look like a just sort of a generic vampire. But I know, at the very least, that the literary reference to Dracula is the specific Stoker character.
Yeah.
And these other Nosferatu dudes are not necessarily based off of Bram Stoker. Is that right?
So, no.
Oh.
and only because I'm just going to make one slight correction. So,
Okay.
So I think it's fairer to say that all the people who are dressing as Dracula for Halloween, they are all specifically dressing as Bela Lugosi's version of Dracula from 1931. So you would still say that they are dressing as Dracula. I don't think anyone is using Dracula as a replacement term for a vampire. And if they are, I've not heard it, or they're doing it wrong. But Dracula is a specific vampire. And in stories like this one, he might even be considered the original vampire. Though, let's be clear, vampire stories existed in mythology for hundreds of years prior to Bram Stoker writing it down. But yes, so I would say that anyone wearing the classic black and white with the medallion of a count, they are specifically, whether they realize it or not, they are, for lack of a better term, cosplaying Bela Lugosi.
Okay. And
and this is where it's going to get frustratingly confusing for you maybe, or for some people. What a lot of people don't realize is that at the exact same time that they were making the Bela Lugosi Dracula movie, they were shooting that during the day, and then on the exact same sets with a different crew and cast, they were shooting a Spanish language version as well.
Okay.
So I suppose they could also be cosplaying that Spanish language speaking incarnation of Dracula. But anyway, yeah. So that was done in 1931. Yeah. And you were asking about
Nosferatu. Is an earlier, as I understand, original version of a vampire, or sort of a different vampire story. Whereas, there are obvious similarities, but that's meant to be a different character.
I'm going to correct you. So in 1922, Nosferatu was released. It's a German expressionistic silent film. Murnau could not get the rights to Bram Stoker's Dracula novel, so he remade the movie adapting that story almost beat for beat. He simply changed the names of the characters and the locations. So Count Orlok is, for all intents and purposes, Count Dracula.
Okay.
To the degree that the family sued and kept trying to win, for whatever reason, like copyright laws just aren't then what they are now. And so I don't know if anything really ever truly came of that. But what's weird is that movie was made because they couldn't get the rights to the original character in the book. But oddly enough, I would say there have been almost as many remakes of Nosferatu as there have been of Dracula itself, despite the fact that the book is now gone into the public domain. For some strange reason, Nosferatu holds this grasp over the public. And it might be because it's the first movie that really featured not Dracula.
Yeah.
There was a movie made the year prior. It's sort of generally thought of as kind of a lost silent film. It was a co-production. I think it was Hungary and France and Austria, maybe. That one was called Dracula's Death, I think. That's the translated title. That was also a silent film. That one is not in any way associated to the book, but it's considered the very first time Count Dracula as a character ever made his way to the screen. But Nosferatu is your first official / non-official adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the book.
Okay.
And a little bit of a side note as well. You have the remake of Nosferatu that was starring Klaus Kinski, directed by Werner Herzog. And that movie was also shot at the same time as his... He literally shot a German language version and an English language version with the same actors on the same sets.
So a variant. So
it is a legit variant. It is not a dub. It is straight up alternate takes in a different language.
Okay.
So
I thought you were going to say like basically another English version.
No.
With different rights, but
no, but Nosferatu had an English and a German version released, made by Herzog, in the same way that Dracula had an English and Spanish language version.
Well, it's not lost on us that the reason the Dracula mythos, especially in throughout the centuries, throughout our cultures, it has this influence on us that we continue to tell this story. The idea, the symbology of an individual, a mysterious dark figure who is both seductive and dangerous and has sort of transcended mortality, but also is not necessarily presenting as invincible and very powerful. What I mean by that is that this is a character who has a lot of flaws and faults and is on this centuries-long journey of yearning. At least in this recent version that we're seeing, this is like probably the central idea of the characterization of this version of Dracula. But as far as the psychology of a Dracula figure, I'm not surprised that we continue to go back and retell this story. There's this idea of wanting to better understand the unliving, the undead, this sense of, immortality. And also, packed into that is this is a monster. This is a predator. This is someone who's unsafe. And so of course, in dark storytelling, there's a proximity to safeness and there's a proximity to danger. And we're sort of exploring that as we, deal with the confusion and the mysteriousness of this kind of character. Dracula is always, I think, you can correct me if you think this isn't true, but if we're looking at Bram Stoker's Dracula, there is often a sense of curiosity, if not a yearning toward the character. We are sort of enticed and interested in getting to know this character.
Are you referring to adaptations of the character, or are you referring to the book itself?
I want to say every version of
or
this. Or
just because he's been around for this long, now everyone is just automatically entranced by the character of Count Dracula?
Well, I think in general, I think that entranced idea is inherent to the character himself.
Sure.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yes. Ish. Yes. Ish. Yes. The problem in many respects is that cinema, even more so in the 92 version, and they doubled down on it here.
Sure.
They tripled down on it here, is the romanticism of Dracula. And when you read Bram Stoker's book, he is in no way romantic. He is a creature who is calculating, conniving, just the pure embodiment of evil. Mm-hmm. He does not have a romantic interest in Mina Harker. She has no romantic connection to him. She simply happens to be a frequent victim of his in the book. So this idea of a lost love and waiting for her return after 4 centuries is entirely made up by folks who really, really, I would say even similar to Del Toro with Frankenstein and some of the films that he's made, Shape of Water, and it's this romantic idea of the other, the creature,
right.
the somehow wanting to make him empathetic. You're supposed to not just simply be scared. And this movie takes that and really runs with it because he is the central character of the film. And I think all you're meant to do is empathize with him and want him to succeed, and not think of him as a monster, but instead as a misunderstood figure who said the wrong thing at the wrong time and became cursed forever and yada yada. But that's not Bram Stoker's incarnation of Dracula.
I agree with you that this version of Dracula really hyperbolizes his romantic characterization almost to the degree where we humanize him. And I think,
I wouldn't say almost.
Yeah,
you're
to the
you're
degree
meant
that
to
where we
humanize him.
And that can be, I think sometimes that is problematic. And I hear what you're saying, we're getting a little bit further and further away from the source material. And we said this about Frankenstein when we watched that film, that we saw this sort of, reimagining that was much more of a fantasy story, much more romantic. And I see that happening here. And I think this is an era, this is a cinematic era for us where we're sort of aligning with these versions of these characters. Or there's a genre happening right now where romantic monsters are sort of in. Mm-hmm. And, I'm willing to give it that. And again, I think I have enough space for that. I think I can tolerate those adjustments and variations.
Yeah. The intent is to add a little more depth to an otherwise one-dimensional character who's just simply a monster in the book. You're giving him a reason for everything now. If you want like a true adaptation of the book, you would be going for the BBC's miniseries, which started Louis Jourdan. And I think that might have been 77. I think it was like late 70s, 77, somewhere in there. That's a pretty accurate incarnation of or adaptation of the book. Everything after that, well, not everything, but you're either going to make him a supervillain, similar, the Christopher Lee version of him, or the Frank Langella version of him, can be quite terrifying at times. So they do lean more into the monster of Dracula, but I wouldn't call those movies accurate representations of the book either. So there's been few, if any. That being said, I love Bram Stoker's Dracula from 92, the Coppola version. Mm-hmm. It takes a big swing. The effects in that movie are incredible. and most of which are entirely in camera. They would have had to have been. But I mean, not even, comped in effects. They tried hard to put everything in camera. The costumes are phenomenal,
right?
As exemplified by what you are wearing now, and the helmet that you have next to you. That armor, I think, will live on. And they try to, in some way, shape or form, up the ante of the armor for this film. But in my opinion, it's ridiculous, and it's not nearly as cool as that red armor.
Yeah,
I think what we should do is we should tell the story that they are telling, so that we're not just going right in the movie.
Yeah, let's jump into it. I mean, I think, overall, I do want to say there's going to be spoilers in this episode, because clearly we're going to get into this version of Dracula.
Yes.
And so if you've not seen the film and you plan to, just prepare yourself. There will be spoilers. Maybe come back to this. But what I want to say about how this opens up, and in general, the tone of this is so, in my mind, so similar to the story of Dracula that I carry.
The Coppola version.
Well, and in general, just, yes, I'd say the Coppola version for sure, in that this is a fantasy horror, gothic film.
Yeah. I struggle with it being horror, or being classified as horror.
Okay.
For starters, it is the brightest lit horror movie I've ever seen. So I get the sense that he's really trying to make a fantastic romance, like a fantasy romance.
I see.
I feel like it shares sort of a kinship with just other sort of sleepy-eyed fantasy romance movies, far more than it does, because even when he is being a vampire in the course of this film, it's never played as scary, right? Like, he's never hiding on he hides once, and that's when Jonathan Harker comes down to the little tomb. But at no point in time, he's never in the shadows. He's never lurking. He's always just searching for a lost love.
I hear what you're saying, that it's not as dark as it has the potential to be, that it doesn't spend too much time in tension and in a deeper feeling of fear. This is not a fearful movie. So I agree, I'm going to align with you on that. Horror isn't the first way I would describe it, but I think it's thematic. I think from the sense of this monster on this pursuit, and having had attacked hundreds of women in this romantic pursuit. And in some of the scenes, even though, I think some of this is that we're a little numbed to Dracula lore, that we know he's going to be in the castle, and we know he's going to show up and hide and pop up out of nowhere and be in the shadows. I will say that I think there are elements of horror to this thematically. But sometimes, of course, we've talked about different horror genres, and something that, I did notice is that the gore was not at the level that I thought it was going to be. There was not a ton of blood. For a Dracula film, not a ton of blood. Even in that battle, that first battle that we see that he's in with all that armor, you see a lot of, and toward the end of the movie, you see a lot of weapons flung and shots fired and swords, piercing, and you don't actually see a lot of blood. There was one scene that's incredibly, striking. It has this momentum toward being incredibly scary and frightening. And there is that one decapitation that I'd say is leaning toward being more gory. But they almost sort of saved that. They saved all that for that one moment. And I didn't think it was gratuitous and extreme.
You're talking about Maria?
Yes.
Yeah.
So for someone like me who's not really a huge fan of explicit gore, this movie was surprisingly
not gory.
less violent. Yeah, in terms of those standards.
But that's even why I say that I think that some of the elements are horrific. You know, there's an entire sequence. It's a beautifully shot sequence with him telling his story about how he developed this perfume in order to attract people. So with I guess the intention that eventually Elizabeta would
I'm sorry, who?
Elizabeta.
Okay.
That's what he... Look, if that's how they pronounce it, that's how I pronounce it.
Okay.
He takes you through the centuries where he's constantly going to these parties and these events, and you've got hundreds of people doing choreographed dance numbers. And then finally it ends with him deciding, this is never going to work like this. I'm just going to make minions out of the women that are in this room. And he goes around and bites the neck of every single woman in the room. But at no point in time does it seem horrific. It's not a horror. It's not shot that way.
No.
It's shot in more of a romantic, beautiful ballroom, beautiful gowns. Eventually the women are just giving themselves to him. There's no horror element there. The event itself is horrific in real world terms, but it's not played to the audience as a scary moment.
No, and I think, maybe you can talk about Luc Besson, because I think that is, that scene especially sort of exemplifies
his style.
That dialing that style to make it, like you're saying, less horrific and more about the psychological expressions of this character. He's, his yearning is so prolonged. He's desperate. He's in anguish. He has so much psychache, and his quest becomes a psychological one. And I think that the way that this was shot, and the choreography and the lighting, and even sometimes the quickness of some of the scenes makes me feel like this is a stylized version of this horror.
Yes.
And maybe that's a Luc Besson thing.
I would say so, although I will admit that I was finding myself looking for more Luc Besson style. I'm not sure how familiar you are with him as a writer-director, but you're certainly familiar with some of his movies.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anything off the top of your head that you know?
Fifth Element.
The Fifth Element.
Yeah.
Perfect. You've got The Fifth Element. You have La Femme Nikita, which I know I've shown you.
Yeah.
You have The Professional. Leon.
Oh, wow.
The Professional. That is sort of a spiritual, it's not a definite prequel, but it's sort of a spiritual prequel to La Femme Nikita. Lucy, you have, I think one of the bigger flops he's ever had was that sci-fi movie, The Valerian.
Oh, yeah.
And so stuff like that. But he's also, interestingly, when he sticks to French stuff in particular, he has a tendency to make sort of lower budget movies that are still fantasy driven. He made a pretty terrific one in 2010, I think, called The Extraordinary Adventures of Adele Blanc-Sec, based on a book. And I thought that one was really quite charming, but feels cheap. And I will say, this to me feels cheap. This
What?
Dracula movie feels cheap to me.
Oh.
And I think it's because it was. It's only about it. I think the grand total budget of this film is in the $50 million range.
Cheap in terms of the sets, the costumes. What do you mean, the lighting, the effects?
Yes.
What do you mean by cheap? All those things?
Maybe not in in some of the costumes. Certainly in the lighting. Certainly in some of the CG work. We do see little almost Seven Dwarf-like-esque animated
Oh.
gargoyles that are his minions in the course, and those feel like they could have used a couple more passes.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
In visual effects. As you mentioned, there was no budget for blood.
Yeah.
Some of the costumes I think are fine, but the movie does feel flat to me, which makes me think that they probably lit it knowing that they were going to have to shoot quickly and not have to do anything super stylized. And so you just put a big bright set together and shoot it, probably not unlike a soap opera, and you make your day faster and leave and come back the next day and make another scene. The armor that he is wearing in the beginning of the movie, we're comparing it to the Francis Ford Coppola version, where he's got this extraordinary designed costume that looks as if it is, that looks as if it is like human muscle that you are, but a demon, a demonic human muscle, character. And then this version, it is, now they said in the Q&A, it was done by the armorer who had done Excalibur. And I'm having trouble seeing it because the armor in Excalibur is clearly metal, clearly awkward to wear, heavy, shiny. The armor that he is wearing at the beginning of this movie to me felt plastic. It does not feel heavy. It does not feel, you could have made it out of foam the way that some brilliant cosplayers do. The helmet itself is gigantic and so impractical.
Right. I kept wondering how he was able to see.
You couldn't possibly see out of that thing. I understand that it's meant to look like a dragon or something, but it just doesn't have the same substance. So to me, the movie felt cheap.
I think a lot of the money also went to
Christoph Waltz.
that, yes, and the makeups for the older
1000%.
version of Dracula,
You're right.
His, he's centuries old. His face is incredibly layered in wrinkles, and he has this magnificent sort of hairpiece. And
it's definitely an homage to that Coppola version where he's got the rounded buns, the white hair buns in the back, and in this case, it's even more dramatic. It's bigger and bolder and much more. The aesthetic is just grander.
It's opulent, and some of that opulence and some of the quirks and mannerisms of the centuries-old Dracula character in this version had some humor to it. Sort of had, I'm not saying that who is it, Gary Oldman, who played the '92 version, didn't have levity and a full kaleidoscope of emotions, but I noticed there was something in. Remind me of his name.
Caleb Landry Jones,
CLJ. So in CLJ's version of Dracula, there's sort of this humorous, self-aware, narcissistic, opulent excessiveness. There's that part of his personality that indulges in scaring and intimidating this person who comes to his castle, Jonathan Harker. And I think, that there's a element, it's a little more lighthearted. It's a little more, I don't know how you would describe it, that sense of levity that actually kind of pulls away from the horror, because his image, his visage is very horrific with the teeth and the nails and everything, but there's this almost endearing quality to him that this actor plays.
Yeah.
Now it's sort of hard to compare, but I thought he did a great job with with his representation of Dracula.
Sure. I with this version of Dracula, it to me, it's similar to Frankenstein in that not my Dracula,
Oh, gosh.
but I understand what they were going for. They were
Absolutely.
going for a romantic movie. They needed you to love Mina as much as he does, and they needed you to love their relationship so that you rooted for them to get back together.
Right.
And so he is played with a lot more humanity. There are scenes where the two of them are sort of courting in ways. And in those scenes, he's absolutely lovely. He's a gentleman. He is charming.
Yeah. So the movie opens with about 300 minutes of them in their bedroom, just giggling and throwing food in each other's faces,
And doing it.
wrapped in the limerence of the relationship. And I remember turning to you and sort of giving you a face. And I think where I became, I don't know, irritated with these scenes. Well, definitely the food, the smearing of the mashed potatoes on someone else's face or whatever food item that was.
It's got like a yogurty, mayonnaise-y look about it, and you're just like, that is disgusting.
It wasn't a cute little sort of on the nose, like, let me just put a little, frosting on your lip.
But it wasn't also, it also wasn't there are people who think that food is sexy, and
no.
And it wasn't that either.
This ain't 9.5 weeks.
Yes.
This was like a childlike fun smearing food on each other's faces that eventually led into lovemaking
And jumping on the bed.
and I sort of started to feel like this was over the top, but to your point, needed to give the audience a sense that these two are so wrapped up in their love for each other.
Yep.
This obsessive love, that this is how they experience their love, completely isolated from the world, stuck in this room, or rather choosing to isolate themselves from others in this room. And where I lost my cool was when they were both wearing the same shirt. So like the same shirt, they were inside.
She was inside the shirt with him.
And I sort of wanted to scream and run out the theater. Like, I think that's where I hit my limit with how over the top and almost unrealistic
I was like, meanwhile, I was like, do I have any shirts that big? Like, what? Okay.
Yeah.
So
not for
we
everyone.
do see that. And then their lovemaking is basically interrupted when his generals or lieutenants or whoever come in with a full set of armor and they say, hey, boss, time to go. We got to go fight some people. And we're going to go fight the Muslims. And he's like, oh, do we have to? And she's like, oh, can't we just live in peace and make the love? And he then goes to the bishop, I suppose, and says, hey, I need you to promise me that my wife's going to be okay. And the bishop says, I'll pray to God that she is all right. And he's like, don't pray. You tell him to make sure she's okay. And then he goes off to war. And this is another place where I thought extraordinarily cheap.
Okay.
His army is tiny. It is a tiny army. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know what the army of his, it's very possible that that's how big his army is. But then when they're talking about the folks on the other side and they're hidden in the woods and they come out, there are a lot of them. And clearly they're meant to be outnumbered to some degree because their defense mechanism is dropping oil, or it actually kind of looked like beer. I mean, it was just like, take the alcohol, pour it on the ground,
Yep.
light it on fire so that they can't see where they're running, the enemy on the other side of the wall of flames. An extraordinary wall of flames, I should say. Good luck trying to get fire to go that high off of like alcohol that you pour onto the ground. the Muslims run in through the fire, and then the next time you see them, you're looking at the king on the other side, looking at this hill that's red, fiery red behind it, and then Dracula emerges with a head on a pike, and then the rest of his army emerges with all of the heads on all the pikes, and it's meant to be terrifying to that king or general or whatever. He then finds out that his wife, Elizabeta, has gone somewhere. And forgive me, I don't know why she left the castle.
It seems to me that she would have been better protected staying in the castle.
Staying in the castle.
But they dressed her up and got her out in the woods.
They put her on a horse. They
why.
had some guards around her. The guards are all ambushed. Her horse runs through the snow. And this is the scene that I think is probably the most problematic for you, because Besson cleverly uses bear traps as landmines, essentially. She is riding her horse, galloping away, and it's constantly just missing bear traps that are snapping around them. The Muslims come in, they are caught up by the bear traps. So you see horses go down. Her horse goes down, and just in time, Dracula rides in and kills most of the guards. There's only one left. He's about to attack Elizabeta, who is her ankle is trapped in a bear trap. And Dracula hurls his sword, and the sword sort of goes through both of them, I suppose, or at least enough into her that it kills her when the other guard, or when the bad guy falls and dies. Dracula gets extraordinarily angry, particularly at God, because he was like, this is the one thing I asked. He kills the bishop and says, my life no longer belongs to God until he brings my wife back to me.
So that is,
my life no longer belongs to him.
That is very important. First, he all but bullies the bishop before the war or before the battle to establish that should anything happen to his wife, it's the bishop's fault, because the bishop is the liaison to God.
Yeah.
That's sort of the story here. And when, by the way, he is the one who actually kills his wife, but he goes back, accidentally, he goes back and blames the bishop for the death of his wife. And before he kills him, establishes that the bishop's promises to him, or the bishop's allegiance and relationship with God, is being held responsible for the livelihood of this woman, which already, is a real problem, because this man is so wrapped up almost in a delusion about the mortality of his wife. He recognizes that her life is in danger, which is, now that I think about it, I think they flee the castle because if the enemies are able to best his army, presumably they'll go to the castle.
Sure, but you only send her with like six dudes. Like,
that's
you're sending her through this treacherous landmine territory.
Yeah.
I also think that it's important to note that he believes that he has been fighting these wars for God. He believes, and that's why we make sure to include that it's Muslims versus Christians. He has made it clear that, I've been killing in God's name, and now God just took the only thing I've ever loved.
Yes. So this is the first betrayal.
Yes.
This is the spiritual betrayal. So from the psychological perspective, this is a traumatic incident that he has already intertwined with religious belief.
Yeah.
And the betrayal and the letdown is that he could not rely on his spiritual leader, the bishop, and more so, because I think this is really not about the bishop. This is about his own battle with God, right? That God has let him down, And ultimately, fundamentally, the betrayal underneath the loss of his wife is that no matter what you do as a Christian, fight for your beliefs, be a good human being, be a good leader, be a good king, or prince, all these things that he was working on, that he strived to be. None of that matters ultimately. That fundamentally what was broken was his spiritual relationship with God, and finding that a critical adjustment has to be made here after her death. Either you accept her death as something that is an unfortunate part of life, of mortality, of the human experience, or you do what he did, which is to, instead of adjusting his spiritual belief, he sort of doubled down and decided that he was not able to tolerate a God that would do this to him, to such a good person, that instead of making that adjustment, he further demands that God show up. And how is God going to show up? I don't mean that literally. I sort of mean that figuratively. God has to prove themselves to fit this man's construct of what God is, which is incredibly narcissistic. It is a grief response, and it's pathological, because he essentially spends the next 400 years, and luckily he's transformed into Dracula, or transformed into a vampire, so he can do this. But he spends the next 400 years essentially willing this spiritual belief to be true by searching for this woman who should be reincarnated in some unknown body in some unknown time.
Except it turns out to be her exact body 400 years later. And I'm still sort of trying to figure out why. For starters, it's a little bit of, and I don't know if this is brilliant storytelling or just a contradiction. He says that his life no longer belongs to God, then becomes a vampire, becomes immortal, lives forever, but spends the entire time looking for a reincarnation of his wife. So he's basically saying, until you bring her back to me, I don't owe you anything. But he's still waiting for her to come back.
Right.
With the assumption that eventually it's going to happen.
Yes.
And then it does. But I can't figure out if God is rewarding him for something, or punishing him for something, or testing him for something. Like, why did she get reincarnated?
Okay.
Why was he given this opportunity to resolve these issues if essentially he was damned going forward?
I look at it a little differently in that this is this is his fantasy. So how I want to look at it, or how I interpreted this as, is that Mina actually, even though it's the same actor, because we're sort of looking at, I think we're looking at this through his perspective.
No, we see her as her. I mean, because they look at the book that has her drawing, like
it's a drawing,
like an etching of her in it.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, that looks a whole lot like that lady. And then it turns out to be that lady. So the reason I say that it has to be her is because she then starts to remember
That's
all
what I'm
the things.
remembering now, is that they touch each other. And
yeah, and she immediately, and then she
memories.
becomes her. She, to the degree that she then can't be without him in the end. Like, their codependency is on full display again.
But
like,
yet I don't believe that to be true.
but she totally becomes her at the end. Like, as if she has been awoken from a 400-year sleep. She becomes.
She does say, I feel like I'm not supposed to be here. I'm from a different time.
Yes. Well, throughout the 400 years that he's been searching for, he's not done anything redemptive. If anything, he's done the opposite. So he's not being rewarded. he's not really being punished any more than like sending her, reincarnating Mina or Elizabeta into Mina is not punishing him because he ultimately gets what he wants. The only thing that it could really be is a test, or finally God saying, look, I'm going to put you out of your misery and I'm going to send a priest played by Christoph Waltz to come and basically, you know, and this is a moment that you actually see in the trailer, so it's not overly spoilery, but there's a moment where Dracula's like,
God sent you here to kill me.
God sent me here to save you.
You not allowing Mina to live now the rest of her eternity the same way you have been damned would actually be saving her life, which you know you're going to want to do. So the two of you shouldn't die together or shouldn't live forever together because you would just be damning her to the same, hell that you've had these last 400 years. And so Dracula then surrenders and allows the Christoph Waltz character to kill him so that he could save Mina that pain or whatever. But she very much is a reincarnation of Elizabeta because they end up kissing and touching, and the memories come flowing back to her.
She wants to wear the same shirt while he's wearing it.
And the next thing you know, they are in the bedroom and she is clawing at him, begging him not to leave and all that in the same way that she was prior.
And she has the flashbacks, these memories, these intrusions.
They all come flooding back.
So everything from the sensory reminders to the flashbacks to the auditory reminders, the music box that he gives Mina that actually is familiar to her. The song is familiar to her. Because
she would play that song. She'd play the music box every time she wanted him to come to the bedroom. That's what he says. When he hands it to Mina, he's like, she would play this whenever she wanted me to come to the castle, or whatever, anywhere in the castle I could hear her. Yeah.
I can't do a Dracula. That sort of sounded like my dad or something.
When you did it?
Yes. She does tell Christoph that she feels not right in her time, that she sort of feels like I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be in a different time.
Right.
And I think, I'd be open to that interpretation because when you said, is this a punishment? Is this a reward? Is this meant to teach him a lesson of morality? And I think from a perspective, obviously the psychological piece here is it's meant to heal him from his grief, that he's spent centuries, whether it's God or some other supernatural force or some other spiritual force or a delusion. But what I will say is finally meeting Elizabeth's reincarnated soul and being with her again, and then saying goodbye to her again, is meant to be a resolution of grief. That, he spent 400 years refusing to overcome the loss, refusing to accept the loss, willing to sacrifice everything else in order to pursue connection and attachment with no one else but this woman who has been killed.
Yes.
Who he has killed.
And as I look it up, it is Elizabeta because it is spelled Elisabeta.
I believe you.
So it's not just his pronunciation.
No, I believe you.
Okay. I'm just making sure. I'm making sure I've got it.
You got it.
Okay.
And so I think from that perspective, to me, it almost doesn't matter that this is God's will or this is his God's punishment, torment, and ultimately forgiveness of this man by giving him this opportunity. Will he do the right thing? I think for me, obviously, the lens is in this fantasy story, this man who has endured a level of traumatic, horrific loss that he has finally been given the opportunity to find resolution in this loss. And in that step, as you mentioned, Christoph saying, I need to stake you in the heart for you to go on to your next, your afterlife, whatever you believe that is. And he's a priest, so, they share that idea in order for her to be released from this curse and to give her the agency to get out of this attachment, where some would say it's some love spell, where some would say it's true, authentic love, where she would be free from it. And it would be a selfless thing for this man to do, to stop giving in and indulging in his own sorrow and loss and not going to therapy, anything but therapy for 400 years. But
I mean, who's he going to talk to? His little gargoyles?
Maybe. There were certainly spiritual versions and other types of versions of therapy. Not as modern as we have now, but...
Well, I do have questions about that.
Okay.
But I want you to be able to finish your thought on this before I launch into that.
Yeah. So definitely for me, this was a story about somebody in experiencing traumatic grief and
sure
and prolonged grief. And if I were to even think diagnostically, this is someone with prolonged grief disorder, which is in our modern psychiatry, it would be at least 1 year of impairment due to a personal loss.
Yeah.
And that impairment is interfering with someone's ability to live their life, to have an occupation, to have successful social functioning, to be able to move forward and find meaning out of this. It's almost he's been stuck in his grief for 400 years.
Yes, for sure.
And Christoph is sort of the therapist that says, I'm not here to destroy you. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you heal. Like, if you want and imagine that consent at the end, which I looking back, I kind of like that Christoph had the opportunity to just slay him, right? He had the opportunity to just end it and see this man as a monster and destroy him.
But instead, he sees him as human. He has empathy for him. He doesn't just see him as a beast that needs to be slain and decapitated. He, for starters, takes out the nice silver stake as if to be like, no, this is
the holy stake.
This is clean. A special moment.
Yeah.
Like, this is a moment, like, we're going to honor this moment. And then has a conversation with him. Just straight up says, look, man, if you don't let me do this, you're going to do worse to her, or as much to her as has happened to you over the last 400 years. And Dracula can't let that happen. So I do appreciate that he gives himself up. Like, the ending, I'm not mad at. And then after he's been staked, she pulls him, now the 400-year-old version of him has returned. And she brings him up onto the bed and does her kissing on him and we should save you or whatever. And he says his goodbye and then he turns to dust. Mm-hmm. And which I would think would be also 400 years worth of trauma if the love of your life suddenly just turned to dust in front of you.
Right.
But yes. Well, but then the curse in general is lifted because all those little gargoyles that we're going to talk about, they become little bald boys.
So tell me, why are those little bald boys his minions? Why?
It was almost as if as if the characters from Beauty and the Beast who became like Chip and Ms.
Right.
whatever and yada yada clocky master, like who, like those characters then became human at the end. And these characters, they were gargoyles who, by the way, had the ability to fight with contemporary martial arts moves. They then come out of the building. We don't see them transform because that would be a visual effects that they couldn't
That
afford.
would cost some money.
Even the old CD-ROM morph wouldn't have worked. They then just sort of pour out, and they look like the boys from Fury Road, like super pale, super sunken eyes, bald heads, wearing little loincloths, and they all just walk out in amazement at the snow and the whatever. And you're like, I guess you're free now. I don't know where you're going to go.
How do you?
I don't know who's taking care of you.
How do you take care of these little younglings?
I don't know how you became gargoyles to begin with. But whatever happened, it's not addressed. And we just get an opportunity to see these several little boys just leave the castle. But
I think we missed out.
But the curse is now lifted.
Well, we missed out on the curse. I never saw the curse happen.
We never saw the curse happen.
I don't know who put the curse.
No, that's not true. We did see the curse technically happen. It's the moment that he kills the bishop, because then he looks up at the crucifix in the chapel, and the chapel starts to cry blood. And
I see.
And then Dracula gestures as if he's on the cross, and his generals then pull him out looking like that. Like that's the curse. That's the moment that he becomes
But he
immortal.
was never bit. This man was never bit.
No, that's why Christoph Waltz is specifically, he says his order has been looking for the original for 400 years.
Got it. So he's the OG. And that's why he can be in the sun.
No. Well, yes and no. This was also a little bit of a contradiction, because in the book, Dracula is able to walk out into the sunlight. His power is diminished a little bit, but he is still, the sunlight doesn't kill him. In this incarnation of the story, Christoph Waltz, when he approaches what is the equivalent of the Lucy character from the book, in this version, she's called Maria. She is chained, and he again empathizes and is like, even a beast is treated with humanity. He explains that the light does not bother them, but direct sun rays do, which is then contradicted later when not only does he walk out into the sunlight, rays and all, but so does Maria, and she doesn't burn. Because in that sanitarium scene, we actually see him lift the window, and he's like, oh yeah, sunlight doesn't bother them unless it's direct sun rays. And then she starts to burn on her hands. But then later she's out in the sun and she doesn't start burning. So I'm not entirely sure. Like, was it just an extraordinary cloudy day?
I think so, because
and so
she then
direct rays weren't touching her.
She puts up an umbrella as if to.
Well, she puts the umbrella up. She is trying to pretend like she's not uncomfortable when she comes in, and she's all merry and giddy and like, hey, I'm back. And then her new bestie, Mina, agrees to go to a celebration with her, and when she leaves the frame and like goes upstairs to get ready or whatever, that's when Maria's like, oh, gotta put this up, like finally, and puts it up. But then it looks stylistic, it's stylish, I should say, for the time. So
there was kind of a Superman thing going on where it almost seemed like the more blood that they drank, the more robust and resistant they were to some of these threats.
Oh, for sure.
So it's almost as if
he de-ages after he drinks an entire cloister of nuns' blood. She is given the young boy who's like the assistant in the sanitarium and nearly drains him entirely of blood, and so she becomes healthy again.
Right, and I wonder if some of that healthy aspect means some higher tolerance and resistance to that sun ray. until you start to deteriorate again.
I'm sure.
So something that really struck me that I thought was powerful was, after he was cursed, and presumably when he realizes he cannot die, he's still in, quote, his young body, but it's unclear. Time has clearly passed. He's in his castle, and he doesn't look to have aged that much quite yet.
Yeah.
He decides to jump from his window, and there's I'm going to talk about suicide a little bit here, just for our audience to know this as a little bit of a content warning. But I found that scene to be a scene that humanized him, and a scene that I think for many of us is unremarkable, relatable, and absolutely unrealistic, if all of that makes sense to you. Because what he does is we watch him make the decision to end his life, and he jumps out the window. I think at this point he already realizes he hasn't been able to die. And so there's some sense that he might survive this, but he does jump from his window.
I think at this point he hasn't figured that out.
I almost get the sense that he's wanting to die.
Yes.
He has a wish for death. He's
Yes.
suicidal, and that he believes this might end his life.
Because what we see is a montage, like it's him
That's what I'm
trying
getting
it time and time and time and time again.
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm getting at, that he's reached a level of desperation to end the psychache, which is the relatable piece, that this longing and yearning for his loved one is so unending and so intense, and this is a part of prolonged grief disorder, that he attempts suicide. And I guess what I'm saying is that it's unclear at that point. He is almost experimenting with his mortality, but has a clear wish to die.
Yes.
And we see him hit the ground, and he goes back up to the castle and
Goes right out the same window.
And attempts again. And there are several sequential attempts to end his life in this very same method, with some injuries, ultimately an accumulation of a lot of bodily injury, but of course, no release from this pain. And then he ends up sort of crawling into bed, defeated and exhausted, injured, and that pain that he feels is still present. Mm-hmm. And I found that scene to be really powerful. Something that I think many people will relate to, and also so tragic, the sense that even death cannot relieve him from this level of psychache. And yet the idea that this is going to be his life now, that there's a sense that he's going to go on and endure centuries of living, and this type of pain is never going to end. And we know that not to be true. Even if we were to live for 400 years, we would all have the psychological capacity to heal from this.
For me, it might be the trauma of living for 400 years.
Certainly, there's additional traumas with living for 400 years and seeing what he's seeing.
But I would say that in the same way that you're saying that you were affected by that scene, and I understand why, for me, I had a similar reaction when he suddenly realizes this perfume thing is not going to work. So I'm just going to turn all these women into my minions and have them scatter around the world to find the love of my life and like report back to me. And when he says, he was like, look, I gave up and I decided to just return home to Elizabeta. He goes home and just goes to her tombstone and lays on it and pushes it open and hits the coffin open, and she's of course deteriorated into dust at that point. And so which it now occurs to me that we did not avoid the psychache of that moment for her, because the exact same same thing happens to her. Yeah. But for me, it was that moment of grief. And I think a lot of us have had this, whether it's another person in our lives or a pet or something, that inability to just get up from the place. And there's a scene where he lays down on top of the grave marker, the tombstone, the sort of long tomb lid. And he lays there for what seems like, it's raining. And then the next thing you know, he's completely covered in snow. So he's been there a long time. He's just given up.
Right.
And that sort of thing for me probably had the same effect on me as the other scene did for you, because it was like, oh, this is an extraordinarily relatable moment of, no, I don't want to leave this spot, because that's where she is. Rather than go looking for her again, she's right there until he realizes she isn't anymore. But yeah. Here are my questions for you.
Okay.
Because in Bram Stoker's Dracula, we do have a sanitarium. It's where Renfield is. We do get letters and notes from the doctor there. We all of that exists. But in this movie, there's a lot more.
Wait, Renfield is in this?
No, in the book.
Oh, okay.
Renfield is in the sanitarium.
And notably, Renfield is not in this.
No, they've basically combined. Maria is the combination of Lucy and Renfield.
Okay.
Because she's the bride who then gets seduced and turned into a vampire. But then in the sanitarium, she's wearing the wedding dress, but she's chained up and clearly going off the rails mentally because she's not fed properly or whatever. And so she is basically playing both characters from the book.
Okay.
But there's a lot more, like the characters from the sanitarium in this movie are as important as even Van Helsing. Wouldn't you say? Like the doctor, he's literally there with them when they storm the castle.
Yes,
and,
correct.
And all of that.
I thought that the doctor had no business storming the castle.
No. Well, except that he's the only other person who knows the secret or whatever.
Right.
But no, he should not be storming any castles.
They should. Yeah, I don't think he made it.
No, he did, because we
did?
see later. In fact, he has the final exchange with Van Helsing as Van Helsing leaves, where Van Helsing's like, "Yeah, everything's fine now." Literally that flippant. He's
that's
like,
that's right.
He's
okay.
like, "Yeah, everything's cool," and then walks past him. We see him. I believe it's an overhead shot looking down into the snow, and he like gets up from the snow as if to say that he had collapsed during the battle or something at one point. But yeah, so I want to ask you about the sanitarium stuff. I want to ask you about psychology in this time period.
Probably one of the worst, because it's hard to tell what years these are, but between the 1800s, between like the mid 1800s and the early 1900s, and most of my knowledge is the United States, and we're presumably.
We're in Paris.
We're in Paris.
Yeah, in this particular version of the story, we're in Paris.
Yeah, which I would argue even worse. And there's some parallels there that I think are true, in that initially these institutions were meant to give opportunities for individuals to have shelter and care, and often linked to religious healing. Especially in Europe, but between the mid 1800s to early 1900s, these institutions, these asylums and sanitariums, were overcrowded and understaffed,
right,
and employed or utilized inhumane methods, including restraints and torture and isolation for these individuals who had both developmental, intellectual, and psychiatric disorders.
And even if you didn't have those, if you just happened to be a woman, you could have hysteria.
Right.
You could, yeah.
Yeah. If you were an eccentric woman, you definitely were in there for hysteria. Well,
and he mentions her sexual appetite, which is clearly meant to be an allusion to the vampirism. But even in the book, Lucy is really quite, I mean, she's torn between two dudes, in the book. So she is a bit more promiscuous and the kind of person who might end up in a sanitarium for her how does he call it? Oh, it's something about her sexual appetite, because Christopher Waltz then says, well, wouldn't you say an appetite is considered a good sign of a patient?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, maybe in some cases, but clearly not like this. And so, yeah. So I guess what I'm asking is, as a psychologist, in those scenes in the sanitarium, did any of that pique your interest?
Well, absolutely. Even though some of those interactions between the staff and the patients in the sanatorium were, I don't know if I want to say like exaggerated or sort of, maybe exaggerated. And what was depicted was basically half-dressed patients wearing these torture devices and these headpieces and these restraints, and they're made to
straight out of Saw.
Yeah, well, and they're crawling around on the floor, and they're moaning and limping around the throughout the corridors,
and feeding each other.
Some of that is a bit of an exaggeration, but it's not too far off from the truth around representing around the time that the type of compassionate care for individuals with psychiatric, intellectual, and or developmental disorders, the way that they were treated during this time was very similar to that. And this is a darker time, that mid 1800s to early 1900s. This is when Freud was developing his theories of psychoanalysis and became known for both having more compassionate approaches to understanding clients, and also creating methods and modalities, philosophies that were sometimes not necessarily, I'd say, as psychologically healthy for some individuals, especially women. So yes, I think my short answer is there's some realism to that, and I think that was sort of exaggerated in some way. Certainly a woman chained up the way that Maria was chained up, it was a bit of an exaggeration.
In what looked like almost a ceremonial kind of way, where it was like a big circle with the chains all coming from different angles and everything. Yeah, I mean, but not for nothing, folks, especially with intellectual disorders, were treated like animals. We're locked up in cages and in spaces like this, not to see the sun, not to get the type of help that they deserved. And sadly, different types of conditions were sort of lumped together, and a lot of people who again deserve to have opportunity for even something as simple as sunlight were not given those opportunities. So definitely a dark time for this field, for sure. Ultimately, is this a movie that you found yourself enjoying?
That's a good question. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it because I noticed that it was not a scene for scene adaptation of the Bram Stoker 1992 Coppola film. I wondered if it was going to be so close to that I would just continue to compare it. And it had some interesting elements that were, I think, that were engaging for me as an audience member. The gargoyles were a fascinating addition to this. Mm-hmm. They looked animated. Mm-hmm. This was like like some Roger Rabbit stuff happening. Like they looked
I wouldn't
out.
I wouldn't go that far.
Well,
they
but
weren't Looney
not-
Tunes-esque, but they are clearly not in the same frame
Exactly.
as the human being.
That's what I mean. They're sort of in a different dimension. And I wondered what they were representing and why they were there.
Representing little ball boys,
Apparently. And what's the story with the mini monks who emerged from the castle when the spell was broken? So yeah, there were elements that kept me interested. And again, because it was not overly gory, I was able to stay engaged and not dissociate too much. The story, I think this for sure is a story about romantic grief.
Yeah.
And what and the tragedy we're in when this happens to us, whether it's the death of a loved one or a breakup or a separation, where, we realize that human attachments are so critical to our well-being. And when we lose that, our entire worldview changes. Mm-hmm. And unless we're ready to make those adjustments emotionally, psychologically, externally, spiritually, we can get lost in the sauce. We can really get stuck in grief. And in this case, this man was stuck in his grief for 400 years. And I think that tragic story is worth telling. So I enjoyed it. And the ending was simple. Mm-hmm. The ending was this, you have to recover, you have to move forward and release yourself from this trap.
Yeah.
And you'll be free. So I thought it was lovely. I don't know, the actor who plays this Dracula, he's an interesting choice. He's conventionally, I almost said conventionally unattractive. He's unconventionally attractive.
Right.
I don't know. Is he? I had a hard time looking at this man.
In general? During the 400-year-old version, or like just
no,
in general?
I rather liked him.
He is not a as you put it, conventionally attractive. He is he's not a bad looking guy. He's just, yeah, it goes back to, so I will say about Caleb Landry Jones, and I think this is the difference for me when it comes to this movie versus, say, Frankenstein. Because in Frankenstein, I pondered if Guillermo del Toro loved this story so much, why he chose to take it into the direction that he did.
Okay.
Whereas by the accounts that I've read in interviews, Luc Besson didn't actually have a particular interest in doing Dracula. What he wanted to do was work with Caleb Landry Jones again, which he had done in a movie called Dogman.
Oh, okay.
And then was like, oh, I want to work with you again. What should we do? And then finally came down to like, we should do Dracula. Like, let's do a Dracula, So it wasn't like this lifelong achievement that had been unlocked by finally making a Dracula movie, which is why I think Besson didn't really feel a need to stick to the original book or even other incarnations of the movie. I think he just wanted to watch a hyper romantic film pitting Count Dracula as the protagonist, for lack of a better word. I thought he did a fine job. I mean, he's no Gary Oldman.
Right.
And
can I just say, to qualify what I said before, where I was impressed with Caleb Landry Jones was when he was in the centuries old Dracula makeup, his affect, his voice. I mean, you got to push through all of the prosthetics. Sure. And all of that opulence that we talked about. He really did push through that, and the voice that he used, and the the glimmer in his eye and the smirk that he would make. Like, I thought he really did a great job with the embodiment of this character and even adding a little bit of style to it. I much rather preferred seeing him in this visage than a younger version where I sort of had difficulty placing him. But yeah, I guess, I want to give credit where credit's due.
Yeah.
And we also saw them in person when Christoph Waltz and CLJ were on stage, and we were just a few feet near them. We were able to see them. And I will still say what I say, that I wouldn't necessarily see this man and think, oh, he's a romantic lead. Like, he doesn't have that sort of conventional appearance of a romantic lead, but he really did make it work. And I think it's all about being able to embody a man who's yearning for this love that is worthy of yearning for. And I couldn't imagine two such different personalities, like Christoph Waltz and this young actor were incredibly different in their craft, their personalities, their approach to this work, their approach to acting. And the reality is they weren't really in a lot of scenes together.
No.
So.
Yeah.
Brian, what did you think about it? Would you recommend this movie?
I thought it was a thing that was filmed and edited.
Don't say that. That's it?
It's fine. I appreciate that he tried to do something a little bit different. But I do not think that this movie is going to go down in the annals of the best Dracula movies ever made. I think for me, what I'm getting tired of, and this applies to Frankenstein, this applies to even Bram Stoker's Dracula to some major degree.
I just want to warn you that the monster community is listening.
And
we have already accepted you into the community. So I just saying.
Well, I'm about to become a monster to you all. So I wish people would stop creating what they're calling adaptations of stories that so drastically change the meaning of the story or the characters, and then titling it Bram Stoker's Dracula or Dracula. Like,
well, this was called Dracula, A Love's Tale.
Right. I would have been happier. I would have been happier if it had been called
The
Lost Love of Dracula or something. Like,
sure.
Something else. Something that, because I'm telling you, when you see it on the marquee, it's not going to say Dracula, A Love Tale.
No.
If nothing else, that title is nothing more than a subtitle. That could have been a tagline on the poster. Like, you're still going to go in there thinking there are generations of people who think Francis Ford Coppola made a faithful adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like, there are probably kids out there writing book reports that are going to get an F because they think that Mina and Dracula are in love. And it's not a thing. It didn't happen. And so I wouldn't mind seeing either a true adaptation of the book or just call it something else. And this is not a situation of, oh, just call your character something, or, just create a different character. Oh, why are you making this character a woman? Or why are you, like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about books that have been incredibly influential now for over a century. And there are people who will not read the book, but will go watch the movie, and they are getting bastardized versions of the story.
That's a rough word. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think that's a harsh word, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And you know me, I mean, the more versions, the better. The more stories, the better.
Sure.
So I'm agreeing with you, as well as saying I think there's space for this movie to be there. We didn't mention Danny Elfman's score. I did
because I didn't think it was all that mentionable.
I enjoyed it. It was a little repetitive, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, when I think of Danny Elfman, like, and this is another one of those places where I sort of felt like it may have been phoned in. Well, I was shocked when the credits rolled and we saw the score was done by Danny Elfman. Because I'm like, oh, give it all to me, because that guy knows a good melody, and I just didn't. There was nothing like particularly Danny Elfman-y about the score.
It was a little subdued.
Yeah. So, anyway. Well, that's that. If you agree with us, if you disagree with us, if you want to keep the conversation going, be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment wherever you listen to your podcasts or right here on YouTube. We would love to hear from you. Let us know what you think. And you can also let us know what you think. Where, Drea?
You can go over to my website, drdreapsychology.com, and leave us a voice message. You can also go to my socials, Instagram and Threads, Dr. Drea Psychology.
You can find me. I am mostly on Instagram at B_Ward028. You can find us both on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. You can also find our Discord link at the Arkham Sessions Instagram profile. You can email us, arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can find us, any number of places. But also you can follow our family over at Fanbase Press. I'm sure they'd love to have you, and you're going to love their comics, their reviews, their news, their podcasts, all the geeky stuff all in one place. I want to thank a couple of patrons for making this episode and all of our episodes possible, starting with Mike Ficklin and Lindsay B. Also, Jamiroquai J. Thank you all so much for your support. We really do appreciate it. You can get your name called out, and you can get a number of other perks by joining our Patreon community. It's patreon.com/Arkham Sessions. And until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.